The hangar didn't just hum, it throbbed. A deep, rhythmic pulse that you felt in your molars and the marrow of your bones. It was the sound of a dozen fusion reactors being coaxed into a controlled burn, a mechanical heartbeat for a ship the size of a small city. The air was thick with the tang of ozone, recycled oxygen, and the faint, metallic sweat of 1,000,000 tons of durasteel straining against the void. I was used to it. After 10 years in the Terran Expeditionary Fleet, a fleet engineer learns to filter out the background noise of a warship. You have to. Otherwise, the constant pressure of the universe trying to tear your home apart would drive you crazy. But today, the hum felt different, sharper. It was the sound of anticipation, of barely restrained violence. Below my boots, through the grated metal flooring, I could feel the deep thrum of the primary weapons array cycling through its pre-fire diagnostics. The Resolute was going to war. My name is Elias Vance, Chief Petty Officer, Fleet Engineering Corps. That's a fancy way of saying I'm the guy who gets his hands dirty. I'm the one who crawls through the maintenance shafts, who gets sprayed with superheated coolant, and who spends his days elbow-deep in the guts of the most sophisticated war machines humanity has ever built. Today, those machines were the GX-7 Paladin-class power armor suits. 72 of them, standing in silent, imposing rows, each one a 70-ton monument to human ingenuity and military might. My job for the past 6 hours had been a simple one, albeit one that required the steady hand of a surgeon. Calibrate the neural interface on the thoracic plating for Lieutenant Eliana Vance. No relation, just a coincidence of surnames, though half the crew ribbed me about it anyway. She was one of the best pilots in the squadron. I'd seen her vids. She moved in that suit like it was a second skin, weaving through debris fields and enemy fire with a grace that was almost terrifying. They called her Ghost. The armor was a beautiful piece of work. Its matte black ceramite hull was pitted with the microscopic scars of countless training exercises and the occasional scrap with pirate skiffs. This wasn't a showpiece. Every dent, every scorch mark was a story, but the chest plate I was working on was new. The old one had taken a direct hit from a plasma bolt during the last skirmish at the Demeter outpost. It had held, but the internal matrix was compromised, fractured. It was my job to make sure the new one was an impenetrable fortress. I had the front panel open, its complex layers of ablative shielding, impact gel, and the neural feedback lattice exposed like the organs of some great metallic beast. The latches were a pain, even with the special tool I'd fashioned from a worn-down spanner. They were designed to withstand a nuclear blast, not the nimble fingers of a tired engineer. "You're muttering again, Chief." I didn't look up. I was concentrating on threading a microfilament conduit through a port no bigger than my thumbnail. Was I? Sorry. The fifth rule of engineering. The suit hates you, and you must convince it otherwise by sheer force of will and a lot of profanity. A soft laugh, like the chime of a distant bell. It was a sound I'd grown to appreciate over the last few weeks. A very human philosophy. I finally glanced up from my work. Lieutenant Eliana was standing there. She stripped off the upper half of her flight suit, tying the sleeves around her waist. She wore a simple, form-fitting black undershirt, her skin pale against the drab hangar lights. Her hair, a stark white that seemed unnatural on someone so young, was cropped short against her skull. A few stray strands were plastered to her forehead with sweat. Her eyes, the most striking thing about her, were a piercing, cold blue. They looked like chips of ice, and they held a depth of ancient knowledge that was perpetually unsettling. To anyone else, she was just a soldier, a very good one maybe, but to me she was something more, something alien. She was a Xylian, one of the few survivors of a race that had been on the verge of extinction a century ago. Humanity had stepped in, pulling them from the ashes of their destroyed homeworld. In return, they gave us their science, their culture, and most crucially for the war effort, their warriors. They were our allies, our friends, our ghosts of a future we were desperately trying to avoid. She stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the cold metal grating. I could smell the faint, clean scent of her skin, a stark contrast to the industrial reek of the hangar. "Almost done," I said, turning back to my work. I was trying to realign a series of magnetic couplings that had been knocked out of spec. My hands were thick with calluses and covered in a thin sheen of grease. "The new plate is a bit tight. Durasteel forging from the Martian yards is good, but it always needs a little persuasion." Eliana circled the armor, her footsteps echoing slightly. She ran a hand along the inside of the arm, a gesture of familiarization. "I hate new components. They don't know me yet." "They don't have to know you, Lieutenant. They just have to protect you." I grunted as I forced a recalcitrant actuator into place. It clicked home with a satisfying thunk. "They're just metal and circuits. They don't have feelings." "You are wrong, Chief." Her voice was soft and a little sad. "Everything has a memory. This suit," she tapped the chest plate with a knuckle, "it feels the echoes of every punch it's thrown, every impact it's absorbed. A new suit has no memories. It is empty." I didn't know what to say to that. It was a very Xylian way of thinking. So I just grunted and kept working, my attention focused on the tangled web of wires and conduits inside the plate. The hangar was quieting down now. The other pilots had completed their final checks and were heading to the briefing room. The final call to battle stations was a few minutes away. I was so absorbed in my task that I didn't notice her move until her shadow fell over me. She was standing right beside the open chest plate, looking down at my hands as they worked. Her proximity was magnetic, making the air feel thicker. Her eyes, those cold, ancient eyes, were studying my face, my hands, the way I held my tools. "You have done this before," she stated. It wasn't a question. "Once or twice," I said dryly, not looking up from my work. "You are very calm for a man who is about to go into battle." "I'm not going into battle," I corrected her, my voice a low rumble. "You are. I'm just a mechanic. My battlefield is right here." I gestured with my head to the open panels of her armor. "If I don't do my job right, the enemy doesn't have to worry about you. The suit will kill you itself." She let out a soft, breathy laugh. It was a beautiful, alien sound. I have never met a human so honest about their own insignificance. I paused, my fingers hovering over a sensitive node. I finally looked up, meeting her gaze. "It's not insignificance, Lieutenant. It's specialization. I know my place in the food chain. You're the hunter. I'm the guy who sharpens the spear." She tilted her head, a curious gesture. Those blue eyes seemed to bore right through me, into my soul. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on her lips. It wasn't a warm smile. It was a smile of amusement, of intrigue. It was the kind of smile a cat gives a mouse before it decides what to do next. "You are an unusual man, Elias," she said, using my first name for the first time. The sound of it on her lips felt intimate, almost wrong. I shrugged, a clumsy gesture that was meant to be dismissive but felt awkward. Just a man with a very important wrench. I went back to my work, my heart beating a little faster than it should have. I was beginning to understand why everyone on the ship was a little bit afraid of her. It wasn't her physical strength, though that was considerable. It was that sense of otherness, of being in the presence of something far older, far wiser, and far more dangerous than yourself. The last coupling was secured. I began the meticulous process of closing the plate, sealing the delicate guts of the machine from the harshness of space. The locking mechanisms engaged with a hiss and a heavy click. The armor was whole again. I leaned back, wiping the sweat from my brow with the back of my arm, leaving a trail of grease. There she is, good as new. Better, even. I recalibrated the servos in the right shoulder. Should give you a fraction more speed on your pivot. Eliana didn't reply. She just stood there, staring at the suit, at the newly installed chest plate. Her hand came up, her long, slender fingers tracing the seam I'd just sealed. She was silent for a long moment. Then, to my utter astonishment, a slow, deliberate smirk spread across her face. It wasn't a human smirk. It was something more nuanced, more predatory. The expression transformed her beautiful face, making it look almost cruel. She turned her head to look at me, those eyes pinning me in place. She chuckled, a low, throaty sound that was completely out of place in the cavernous hangar. She took a step closer to me, and I instinctively leaned back, my shoulders bumping against the hard frame of her armor. She was close now, close enough that I could see the faint, almost invisible pattern of scales on her cheekbones, close enough to feel the strange, cool aura of her body. Her smirk widened. "Go on, human," she purred, her voice dripping with a strange, electric amusement. "Tell me, did you enjoy touching my armor?" Her words hung in the air. I felt my face flush. I opened my mouth to reply, but no words came out. My mind was a blank, a mess of confusion, and a jolt of something I didn't have a name for. The klaxon blared overhead, a deafening shriek that shattered the strange, intimate silence. "All hands to battle stations. All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill." The spell was broken. Eliana straightened up, her smirk disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. The playful predator was gone, replaced by the cold, focused warrior. She gave me one last, unreadable look before turning and climbing the skeletal framework of her paladin suit. She slid into the cockpit with practiced ease, the massive armor plates folding around her. I just stood there, my heart hammering against my ribs, the sound of her words echoing in my head. "Go on, human." I looked down at my hands, still trembling, and saw the faint traces of alien skin on my fingers where she had touched my arm. The hangar was suddenly a storm of activity. The clank of boots, the shouted orders, the final roar of the suit's fusion engine spooling up. I was jostled out of my daze by a passing crewman. "Chief, get to your post. The bugs are here." "Yeah," I muttered, my voice hoarse. "Yeah." I stumbled away from her armor, my mind still reeling. The entire world had just been tilted on its axis. In a few hours, maybe less, I'd be watching her on the tactical display, a single blip among hundreds, and wondering if that smirk, that question, was her idea of a joke or a warning. The ground shook as the Resolute's main guns fired, a sound like the world ending. The galaxy was about to go to war, and I had just realized that I might be fighting an entirely different kind of battle. Part 2: The Ghost and the Engineer. The ship shuddered violently, a tremor that ran through its entire length like a dying beast. The lights flickered, and the ever-present hum of the reactors went flat for a second before roaring back to life. The first salvo from the Combine fleet had found its mark. My station was in the Auxiliary Damage Control Hub, a cramped, windowless room buried deep in the ship's belly, a world away from the sleek, terrifying elegance of the hangar. My console was a chaotic mosaic of blinking red and amber alerts, each one a scream for attention. I was the one who listened to those screams, prioritized them, and sent teams to plug the holes. "Bridge to damage control, report status." The voice of Captain Thorne, sharp and clipped, crackled over the comms. "Aux control here, Captain," I replied, my voice steady despite the nervous tremor in my hands. "Multiple breaches on decks 7 through 9. Sections 14 and 15 are venting atmosphere. We've got containment teams en route. Main power is holding at 93%. Make it 95, Chief, and keep me posted on the Paladin Squadron. They're our main spear." "Aye, Captain." A new alert, a high-priority one, flashed onto my screen. It was for the suit diagnostics. My stomach dropped. I opened the file, a cold dread washing over me. It was from Eliana's suit, the GX-7 designated Ghost. The report was brief. Thoracic plate, microfracture detected in lattice 3. Integrity, 87%. Performance compromised. Requesting immediate maintenance before next engagement. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. My hands, which had been flying across the console, went still. The coupling, the one I'd struggled with, the one I'd sealed with a grunt and a prayer. Had I damaged it somehow? The stress of the initial impact, the vibrations from the ship's guns, it might have been enough to weaken the durasteel. The thought made me feel sick. Engineering to Chief Vance, a new voice cut in. It was Lieutenant Commander Sato, my direct superior. I've reviewed the diagnostics from Ghost. That fracture is a priority one. Get up to the hangar and fix it. Sir, I have a dozen other teams coordinating damage control in sectors. She's the priority, Vance. If she goes down, we lose our best asset in the first wave. You fix that plate. You fix it now. I'll take over here. I didn't argue. I didn't have the right. I slammed my fist on the console in frustration, then grabbed my tool belt. The race was on. I sprinted out of the control room, the heavy metal hatch slamming shut behind me. The corridor outside was chaos. Smoke billowed from a fractured pipe, and crewmen in vacuum suits were frantically sealing a breach with expanding foam. The air was thin and tasted of burnt wiring and ozone. The hangar was a different kind of chaos when I arrived. It was a hive of frantic activity. Ammunition loaders were scurrying under the massive legs of the standing paladins, feeding belts of high-explosive rounds into the suit's hip-mounted cannons. Techs were running final diagnostics, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of their data slates. Aliana's armor was still in its cradle, but she wasn't inside it. She was standing beside it, her arms crossed, her expression one of cold, controlled fury. The other pilots were already sealed in their suits, their voice modulators creating a chorus of distorted metallic chatter. She was waiting for me. I skidded to a halt in front of her, out of breath. The tension radiating from her was palpable. "Report, Chief." Her voice was clipped. All traces of the playful, enigmatic being from an hour ago were gone. "I'm on it, Lieutenant," I panted, already kneeling by the chest plate. I popped open the access panel, my hands working with a frantic speed that was a contradiction to the delicate nature of the work. The internal lattice was indeed showing signs of stress. A fine network of hairline fractures spiderwebbed across the secondary stabilizer mount. "What happened?" she asked, her voice hard. It wasn't an accusation, but it felt like one. I could hear the faint hum of her suit's reactor, a low, building whine that matched the tension in the air. "It's the new forging," I muttered, trying to sound confident. "It's not as elastic as the old Martian batches. The impact compression, plus the vibrations from the firing sequence. It's just a hairline, Lieutenant. Nothing a fresh batch of bonding agent and a recalibration of the flux compensator can't fix." I was already pulling out a small, high-pressure canister of molecular bonding agent. This stuff was the real miracle of the modern age. It was a substance that could repair broken molecular bonds in metals, effectively fusing them back together at an atomic level. But it was a temporary fix, a battlefield patch. It needed time to cure, and more importantly, it needed a power surge to the flux compensator to be properly integrated. "You are sure?" Aliana leaned down, her presence suffocating. "My life depends on this plate, Chief. The lives of my squadron depend on this plate." "I know," I said, my voice a little raw. I looked up from my work to meet her gaze. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't think I could fix it." Our eyes met. I saw a flicker of something in hers. Fear. No, it was something else. Vulnerability. "Just get it done, Elias." She called me Elias again. It was a deliberate act, a way of reminding me of the strange connection we'd formed in the quiet before the storm. The hangar was a symphony of impending doom, and we were in our own little bubble, two people connected by a piece of metal. I worked faster. I sealed the fracture with the bonding agent, then my fingers flew across the small control panel on the chest plate, entering the sequence to reroute power for the integration pulse. "All right, I'm going to need you to fire up your reactor for a second, just a 40% surge to the primary core. I need a power spike to bond the agent with the durasteel." She nodded and tapped a command on her wrist gauntlet. The hum from her suit intensified, shaking the deck plates. "Now. Wait for the mark. I need to initialize the sequence." I typed in the final command on the chest plate's interface. A single red light began to blink. "All right, Mark." She triggered the surge. A pulse of raw energy shot through the suit's core, a crackling roar that felt like a punch to my chest. The light on the chest plate went from red to green. The small display next to it showed integration complete 100%. The tension in my shoulders finally eased. I let out a long, slow breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I slammed the access panel shut and engaged the locking latches with a series of sharp clicks. "It's done," I announced, my voice tired. "Good as new, maybe even a little better." Eliana let out a breath of her own. She turned her back to me, and as she did, she gave a curt, dismissive wave of her hand. "Thank you, Chief. You are dismissed." The word hung in the air, dismissed. I was a problem she'd solved, a part to be fixed. I stood up, my knees aching, and gathered my tools. I felt a sudden, unexpected sting of anger, a sharp, bitter disappointment. "Dismissed," I repeated, the word coming out louder than I intended. She turned back to me, a flicker of surprise on her face. The pilots in the surrounding suits had gone quiet, their attention now focused on the small drama unfolding on the deck. I stepped closer, my anger warming my blood. "You smirk at me, call me by my first name, ask me if I enjoyed touching your armor like it's some kind of game, and then, after I save your life for the second time today, you dismiss me like I'm a malfunctioning cleaning drone." She blinked, that unflappable alien coolness seeming to crack for a fraction of a second. "You are a technician. That is your function. I am a soldier. That is mine. I was merely expressing my thanks in a way that was culturally appropriate." "Culturally appropriate," I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "In what culture is that appropriate? Is that a Xylian thing? You ask a guy a bizarre question like that, make him feel like he's part of some personal drama, and then you just cut him loose. That's just playing games, Lieutenant. That's not culture." I could feel the stares of the other pilots. The silence in the hangar was heavy, broken only by the low hum of the suits. Eliana's expression was unreadable. "Perhaps," she said softly, "you are right." The klaxon blared again. "Paladin Squadron, report 2 launch BAYS. Enemy picket SHIPS approaching." The moment of confrontation evaporated. Eliana turned, her movements fluid, and pulled herself up into the cockpit of her suit. The canopy closed with a hiss of hydraulics. The suit's external speakers boomed, a deep, synthetic voice. "We will discuss this later, Chief Vance." Her voice echoed through the hangar, a promise laced with an unspoken threat. "If I survive." The armor's massive feet lifted from the deck plates as its anti-gravity repulsors engaged. It floated forward, a silent, deadly phantom, heading for the launch bay. I watched her go, my heart pounding. The giant metal form of the ghost descended into the launch tube. There was a flash of light, a concussive roar, and then she was gone, hurled into the blackness of space. I was left standing alone in the emptying hangar, clutching my tool belt, the ghost of her smile and the sting of her words hanging in the air. The battle for the Resolute was just beginning, but I had a feeling the real war had already started. Part 3, 1,000 Points of Light. The tactical display in the damage control hub was a nightmare of crimson blips and swirling lines of fire. It was like watching a school of sharks tear a whale apart, except the sharks were alien warships and the whale was my home. The Resolute was holding, but just barely. I could feel each impact as a shudder through the ship's superstructure, a physical blow that registered in my gut. I tried to get back to work after Eliana launched, but my mind was a million miles away. The image of her smirk, the feel of her cool fingers on my arm, and the strange, angry exchange in the hangar kept replaying in my head. I couldn't focus. My hands were clumsy on the console. I misidentified a hull breach, sending a repair team to the wrong sector. Saito, to his credit, just told me to take a break and get some air. The air, of course, was just recycled, but the sentiment was understood. I found a small observation port, a sliver of reinforced transparasteel nestled in a forgotten corner of the corridor. The view was terrifying. The Resolute was a giant beast of fire and metal, and outside, the universe was a violent, chaotic mess. Energy beams sliced through the darkness like brilliant, deadly lasers. A nearby fighter exploded in a silent bloom of orange and white, its pieces spinning off into the void. And among that chaos I could see them, the Paladins. They were a phalanx of blackened steel, wadding into the storm. They moved with a grace and efficiency that seemed almost supernatural, but one of them stood out. The Ghost. I could just make her out, a blur of motion against the inky blackness. She moved like a phantom, dancing between enemy ships. One moment she was on the right flank, the next she was on the left, unleashing a devastating volley of cannon fire that tore through the shields of a Grolthian destroyer. The destroyer, a lumbering, beetle-shaped beast, reeled, its energy weapons sputtering. "She's a magnificent bastard, isn't she?" a voice said next to me. I jumped. It was Lieutenant Commander Sato. The man was a walking skeleton, thin and gaunt from the stress, but his eyes were sharp, intelligent. He had a cup of synth coffee in his hand, and he nodded his head towards the viewport. "She's something, sir," I agreed, my voice hoarse. "I read your exchange in the hangar," he said, his voice flat. I felt a hot flush of embarrassment. "Don't worry. Everyone reads everyone's logs. It's what keeps us from killing each other." He took a sip of his coffee. "You're a good engineer, Vance, maybe the best I have, but you don't understand them, do you? The Xylian." "No, sir," I admitted. "I don't." "Neither do I," he said, surprising me. "But I know they're not like us. Their minds work on a different wavelength. They see connections we don't. They experience the world and the people in it differently. She's not toying with you, Vance. She's trying to understand you. It's a compliment. She's just using her own incredibly awkward version of a pickup line." I blinked. "A pickup line, sir?" "What else would you call it?" Sato chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "You touched her armor, she asked you if you enjoyed it. It's a Xylian mating ritual." I stared at him, dumbfounded. That's insane." "Probably," he agreed. "But they're insane, so is war. And so are you for still standing here watching her. Your post is in the hub." He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture of camaraderie, and walked away. I turned back to the viewport, a strange, foolish hope blooming in my chest, a mating ritual. I was a piece of meat being sized up by an alien killing machine. It made a weird kind of sense. The battle continued to rage. A combine carrier, a massive, bulbous ship, was moving closer. It was disgorging a swarm of smaller attack ships, like a wasp nest spilling its contents. The Ghost was leading the charge against it. She was a one-woman army, weaving through the swarm, leaving a trail of debris in her wake. Then it happened. I saw it. A Grolthian destroyer, the one she just crippled, had somehow managed to get a clear shot. A concentrated blast of plasma energy slammed into the Ghost's left flank. The impact was so violent I saw the armor's shields flicker and die. The suit tumbled, spinning out of control for a long, terrifying moment before its gyros kicked in and it righted itself. But it was hurt. I could see the damage from here. A section of its left leg and lower torso was blackened and smoking, venting atmosphere into the void. A new alert flashed on my data slate. It was a distress signal from the Ghost. "Mayday, Mayday, this is GX-7 Ghost. I have sustained critical damage to my leg servos and lower chest plate. Thrusters are at 30%. I am falling out of formation. Requesting immediate retrieval." My heart stopped. My chest plate, the one I just patched with bonding agent and an improvised flux pulse. The desperate repair I'd performed minutes before the chaos began. It wasn't designed for sustained combat. It was a patch, a temporary fix. A memory of my own handiwork, a potential weak point in her armor, flashed through my mind. A sick feeling of guilt and responsibility washed over me. I was supposed to be a damn good engineer, and all I had done was provide a shoddy, substandard patch. Suddenly, The comms channel erupted with a chorus of other voices. "This is Paladin 2. I'm breaking formation to cover her." "Negative, Paladin 2. We have to press the attack. The carrier is the priority." The voice of Captain Thorne cut through the noise. "All units, hold the line. We'll get a salvage ship to her. Paladin Squadron, you are to engage the carrier." It was a death sentence. They were abandoning her, leaving her to drift alone, a damaged piece of equipment, an expendable asset. The cold, brutal logic of warfare. "No," I whispered. It was a stupid, pointless thing to say. No one could hear me, but I said it again, louder. "No." I sprinted back to the auxiliary damage control hub, my mind racing. The plan came to me in a flash of pure adrenaline. It was insane. It was reckless. It was the kind of idea that got you court-martialed or killed. I burst into the hub and slammed my fist on the comms console, overriding the frequency. "Bridge, this is Chief Vance in Aux Control." "Vance, what is it?" It was Captain Thorne. He was furious. "Sir, I need a salvage skiff. The Ghost suit is compromised. I know the damage. I can fix it. But I need to get to her before she's a sitting duck for the swarms. I need to EVA." There was a long silence on the other end. I could practically feel the captain's incredulity radiating through the comms. "Are you insane, Chief? We're in the middle of a firefight. You're an engineer, not a combat diver." "Sir, with respect, if we lose the Ghost, we lose our best pilot. My repair on her chest plate was a battlefield patch. It was substandard. It's my fault she's in this position. Let me fix it. Give me a skiff and a few minutes. I can do it." A different voice, sharp and authoritative, cut in on the channel. It was Aliana herself. "Captain, this is Ghost. I can confirm that my suit systems are failing. I am a liability on the field. Permission to authorize the Chief's request." The pause that followed felt like an eternity. Then Thorne's voice crackled back. "Fine, Skiff 4 is prepped. Chief, if you're not back in 15 minutes, you're a dead man. We're not waiting for you." "Thank you, sir," I said, my voice firm. I was already moving. I didn't need a spacesuit. I grabbed a lightweight EVA pack, the kind you used for short-duration hull repairs. I heard the automated voice of the launch bay count down as I strapped in. The small skiff, a boxy, utilitarian craft, was a far cry from a sleek fighter. It had maneuvering thrusters and a basic cargo bay. It wasn't meant for combat. The launch bay doors opened. The blackness of space yawned before me. I slammed my fist on the thruster controls, and the skiff shot forward, a tiny speck of metal against the backdrop of an interstellar war. Part 4, a reprieve in the void. The trip from the Resolute to the Ghost's drifting position was the longest 15 minutes of my life. The skiff was a clumsy, unresponsive beast. I was an engineer, not a pilot. I compensated for its sluggishness by throwing caution to the wind. I cut through the debris field, dodging chunks of shattered ships and the occasional silent corpse of a dead pilot. The entire battle was happening around me. Energy bolts missed my skiff by a hair's breadth. I could feel the heat of their passage through the hull. I saw her, the Ghost. Her silhouette was unmistakable against the swirling starscape. She was drifting, spinning slowly, a wounded animal in the dark. I could see the damage clearly now. The left leg was a blackened, twisted mess. The lower chest plate, my chest plate, was scorched and pitted. I piloted the skiff alongside her, matching her spin with a maneuver that was pure instinct. I keyed the comms. "Ghost, this is Skiff 4. I'm here. I'm going to dock." "Understood, Chief. Be careful. My maneuvering thrusters are offline. I have one shot with my emergency grapple." "Just hold still," I said, a grim smile on my face. "I've got you." The docking was a ballet of desperation. I used the skiff's magnetic clamps to latch onto the Ghost's back. The metal groaned in protest. A section of the Ghost's armor plating was warped, making the lock unstable, but it held. I sealed my EVA pack, checked the oxygen, and opened the skiff's airlock. The void was absolute. No sound, just the eerie silence of space. I was surrounded by death. I pushed off, floating towards the ghost's damaged chest plate. I landed on the suit's torso, my magnetic boots clamping onto the metal. The scorching had warped the latches on the access panel. I had to use a plasma cutter to burn through the seal. The hissing sound of the cutter was the only thing I could hear over the pounding of my own heart. The access panel popped open. I peered inside. The internal lattice was a catastrophe. The bonding agent I'd used was holding, but the surrounding durasteel had been stressed to the breaking point. There were new cracks, radiating outwards from the original fracture like a spiderweb. The flux compensator was fried. The whole assembly was on the verge of catastrophic failure. "Damn it," I muttered, my voice trembling. "This was my fault. If only I'd been more thorough, more careful." "Chief, what is the status?" Eliana's voice crackled in my helmet, a welcome sound that grounded me. "It's bad, Lieutenant," I admitted. "The bonding agent is holding, but the impact caused secondary damage. The flux compensator is dead. I'm going to have to bypass it." "Is that possible?" "It's risky," I said. "I'm going to have to hardwire a bypass. It'll work for a few minutes, give you enough power to get back to the ship. It's not a long-term fix." "It will be enough." I got to work. My fingers moved with a frantic precision, sorting through the tangled mess of wires and conduits. I had to identify the primary power leads to the compensator, splice them together, and create a direct path. It was a crude, barbaric solution. If the power flow wasn't perfectly regulated, it could overload the whole suit and fry the pilot. But it was the only chance we had. The whole time I worked, I could feel the battle raging around us. A stray piece of shrapnel pinged off my helmet, making me flinch. A nearby explosion sent a wave of heat that I felt even through the suit. "Chief," Eliana's voice was strained. "My lateral thrusters are firing sporadically. I think the damage is spreading." "I know," I yelled, my frustration getting the better of me. "Just give me a second, I'm almost done." My fingers were numb from the cold. The sweat in my suit had frozen, making my skin feel like ice. I finally found the last wire I needed. I took a deep breath, held the two ends together, and closed the connection. There was a sharp crackle, a blinding flash of blue light, and then a low, steady hum. The suit's power indicators flickered once and then stabilized. "It's done," I gasped, slamming the access panel shut. The latches, which I'd had to force open with the cutter, were now bent and useless. I had to use a secondary mechanical clamp to hold the panel in place. It was a mess, a patchwork of desperation. "Power is back online," Eliana said, her voice filled with a new hope. "Thrusters are stabilizing. Thank you, Elias." "Don't thank me yet," I said, my voice weary. "I just gave you a bomb with a very short fuse. You need to get back to the ship now." "I will, but I will not leave you out here." I laughed, a short, panicked sound. "The skiff is right there. I'll be fine. You have to go. Those swarmers are getting closer." As if on cue, a group of 3 Groltian skirmishers, smaller and faster than the destroyers, broke away from the main formation and headed our way. Their energy weapons were powering up. "Go," I shouted, "now." The ghost's thrusters flared, a brilliant burst of blue flame. The suit rocketed away from me, its movements jerky and unsteady. The engines were still damaged. She was a wounded bird trying to fly. I scrambled back into the skiff, my heart pounding. I slammed the door shut and engaged the engines. The skiff lurched forward. I wasn't a fighter, but I knew how to run. I put the skiff into a steep dive, falling towards the relative safety of the Resolute's hull. I looked back. The ghost was weaving through the enemy fire, a brilliant, defiant spark. A beam of plasma energy lanced out, missing her by inches. She returned fire, her cannons blazing, catching one of the skirmishers in its fuselage. It exploded in a silent fireball. The other 2 skirmishers were on her tail. She was outnumbered and outgunned. My heart was in my throat. I watched her perform a desperate, twisting barrel roll that almost made her collide with one of the skirmishers. She was fighting for her life, and I was watching from a safe distance, helpless. Then I saw her do something incredible. She cut her main engines, drifting dead in space. The two skirmishers overshot her, their targeting computers confused. As they passed, she spun her suit on its axis and unleashed a point-blank burst from her chest-mounted cannons. The first skirmisher was torn in half. The second, stunned by the sudden turn, was too slow to evade. She ripped into its engine nacelle and it spiraled away, a burning wreck. She had won. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I watched her turn, her suit battered and smoking, and head back towards the Resolute. Her voice crackled over the comms, her words broken by static. "Chief, get back to the ship. I need a real engineer for a proper fix." I laughed, a raw, shaky sound that was half relief, half exhaustion. I was still shaking as I guided the skiff into the Resolute's launch bay. The minute I was inside, the gravity took hold, and I collapsed to the deck, the adrenaline finally leaving my body. I had just performed an EVA in the middle of a battle, fixed a dying war machine, and watched its pilot perform a miracle. I was just an engineer, but today I'd felt like something more. Part 5, a new kind of respect. The hangar was a muted, somber place when I finally dragged myself back inside. The battle was over. The Resolute had survived. The Combine fleet was in retreat, but the cost was everywhere. Empty cradles where Paladin suits should have been. Crew members tending to the wounded. The metallic tang of blood mixed with the ozone and burnt wiring. I stumbled towards my station, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. My hands were still shaking. I saw Lieutenant Commander Sato, who gave me a short, curt nod, a gesture of acknowledgement. I'd done my job. I'd been a crazy son of a bitch, and I'd done my job. The Ghost's cradle was empty. My heart sank. Had she not made it? Had the bypass I'd rigged failed in the final moments? I was about to ask Sato when a voice, clear and sharp, echoed through the hangar. "Chief Vance." I spun around. Aliana was there. She was standing at the edge of the hangar, her flight suit untied, revealing the black undershirt she wore underneath. Her face was pale, but her eyes were bright, burning with a new intensity. She was leaning slightly to one side, favoring her left leg. A gash across her arm was hastily bandaged. The white cloth stained a dark crimson. She walked towards me. Her steps were slow, measured, and I could see the faint wince of pain with each footfall. The whole hangar seemed to go quiet as she approached. The crew stopped what they were doing and watched. We were on display again. She stopped a few feet away from me. Her blue eyes, those cold, alien stars, were locked onto mine. The silence was deafening. I could feel the eyes of everyone on the ship burning into us. I started, not knowing what to say. "I'm glad you made it, Lieutenant." She didn't reply. She just stood there, staring at me, her expression unreadable. Then, to my complete shock, she did something I never expected. She laughed. It was a full, genuine laugh, a sound that was both beautiful and alien. It echoed through the hangar, breaking the tension. She closed the distance between us in a single step. Without warning, she reached out and took my face in her hands. Her palms were cool against my skin. The sensation was electric, a jolt of something that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Her eyes were inches from mine. "You are a fool," she said, her voice soft but clear. "You are a complete and utter fool." "I have been called worse," I stammered. "But you are my fool." She leaned in, her lips brushing my cheek, a gesture so quick and so close that it was over before I could process it. The feel of her skin against mine, the warmth of her breath, it was like a brand. She pulled back, a small, genuine smile on her face. It was a smile that reached her eyes, making them look less like chips of ice and more like fragments of a frozen ocean. "You saved my life, Elias Vance. You went against orders, you broke protocols, and you risked your own life to save mine. Why?" "Because you were in trouble," I said, my voice a croak. Because I couldn't just let you die. Not after everything." She tilted her head, a curious, almost playful gesture. "After what?" "After you asked me that question," I admitted. "Back in the hangar, before the battle, you asked me if I enjoyed touching your armor." She chuckled, a soft, breathy sound. "And did you enjoy it?" The question hung in the air, more intimate and charged than any declaration of war. The silence in the hangar was absolute. "Yes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I did." Her smile widened. It was a smile of triumph, of understanding, of a bridge being built. "Good," she said, "because I enjoyed watching you do it." She finally released my face, taking a step back. The spell was broken. She looked around the hangar, her eyes glinting with a newfound amusement. The crew, who had been frozen in place, suddenly snapped back to life, busying themselves with their tasks to avoid being caught starring. Eliana looked back at me, her expression softening. "You will take a look at my suit when it is brought in. It is, as you so eloquently put it, a mess. And then maybe we can continue this conversation, perhaps over something other than synth coffee." "I'd like that," I said, my voice still a little hoarse. "I'd like that a lot." She gave me one last, lingering look, a look that promised both danger and something else, something I was only beginning to understand. Then she turned and walked away, her steps more assured now, a hint of a swagger in her gait that hadn't been there before. I just stood there, watching her go, a smile spreading across my face. I had a feeling that the war with the Combine was the least of my worries. My life had just been irrevocably and wonderfully complicated, and I wouldn't have had it any other way. Part 6. The Echoes of a Better Dawn. The quiet of the hangar was a welcome reprieve. The battle was a raw, bleeding memory, but the threat was gone. The Resolute was sailing through the debris field of the enemy fleet, its engines humming a low, steady dirge for the fallen. My station was in a corner, a small workbench cluttered with components and tools. The Ghost's armor was there, its damaged chest plate open. The work was methodical, slow. I was replacing the burnt-out flux compensator, taking my time, relishing the familiar feeling of the tools in my hands. I could hear the faint hum of the ship's engines, the distant clatter of a mess hall, and the soft beeping of a medical bay monitor. It was the sound of a ship coming back to life. The hangar door hissed open. I didn't need to look up. I knew that rhythm, that soft, measured tread. "You are very quiet," Eliana's voice said. She was standing a few feet away, dressed in a simple gray civilian jumpsuit. The bandage on her arm was new, the wound already healing. "I'm concentrating," I said, not looking up. "This is delicate work." She laughed, that soft, melodic sound that was starting to feel less alien and more familiar. "You are always concentrating. I think you could be in the middle of a firefight, and you would be concentrating on the molecular structure of your wrench." "That is a very specific insult," I said, a smile playing on my lips. She walked closer, her presence a gravitational pull on my attention. She sat on the edge of the workbench, her shoulder brushing against mine. The contact was warm, familiar. I finally looked up. Her eyes were on me, soft and unreadable. She was different, less guarded. The weight of the battle, the fear of almost dying, had stripped away some of the careful layers she wore. "Tell me about your home," she said, her voice a soft request. "Tell me about Earth." I paused, the question catching me off guard. "It's not much to look at," I said, a little embarrassed. "We've got oceans and mountains, deserts and forests, and a lot of people who are really, really good at breaking things." "But it is yours," she said. "Your home, it is the place where you belong." "I suppose it is," I admitted. "It's where I grew up. It's where I learned that you fix things, you don't throw them away, you're careful, you're patient, and you never ever leave a man behind." She was quiet for a moment, her gaze focused on the patch of Durasteel I'd been working on. "You risked your life for me, Elias. You broke the rules. You put yourself in danger." "Yeah," I said a little self-consciously. "I guess I did." "Why?" she asked, her voice soft. "I understand your reasons, the strange curiosity, the feeling of attraction. But why? What is it about me that made you do that?" I paused. It was the question I'd been asking myself for days, the question that had no easy answer. "Because you're not just a weapon, Lieutenant," I said, my voice low. "I saw it in the hangar before the battle. You were worried, not just for yourself but for your squadron. You were scared. And you were brave. And that's what makes me want to fix things for you." I looked her in the eye, the truth of my words settling in my chest. "I don't just fix machines. I fix people too, or I try to. And you needed fixing. Not your armor, but you needed to see that someone cared enough to try." She stared at me, her eyes wide. For a long moment the hangar was silent. Then a single tear traced a path down her cheek. "I have not let anyone care for me in a very long time," she whispered. "It is a difficult concept." "I know," I said, "but maybe you should try. I'm a pretty good teacher." She laughed again, wiping the tear away with the back of her hand. "You are a terrible teacher. You never explain what you are doing. You just point at things and grunt." "It's a time-honored tradition," I said, grinning. We sat in comfortable silence. The low hum of the ship seemed to get a little warmer, a little more hopeful. The war was still out there. The Combine was still a threat. But for a few moments there was just us. "So," I finally said, breaking the silence, "what happens now? The battle is over. We go back to base. You go back to being a pilot. I go back to being a mechanic." "Is that what you want?" she asked, her gaze steady. "No," I said, my voice firm. "It's not." "Then what do you want, Elias?" I took a deep breath. The words were scary. They were vulnerable. They were also, for the first time in my life, the truest thing I could say. "I want to see where this goes," I said. "I want to figure out what a human engineer and a Xylian pilot are supposed to be to each other. I want to fix your armor, and I want you to watch me do it. And I want to hear you laugh, because it's a sound that makes the universe feel a little less cold." She reached out, her hand covering mine. Her fingers were cool, but the gesture was warm. "That," she said, her voice a soft whisper, "is the most human thing I have ever heard." The ship hummed around us, a lullaby of steel and circuits. The battle was over, but for me another one was just beginning, and for the first time I wasn't afraid. We walked out of the hangar together, into the hum of a ship coming back to life. The future was uncertain, a battlefield of its own. But for now, in the quiet aftermath of a war, a human and a Xylian had found something worth fighting for. Something fragile, something new, something that felt a lot like hope.